And our team coverage on the Minnesota lawmaker shootings now turns to local reactions from politicians within our area. One of them being Congressman Richard Neal, who was here in Western Mass today. Western Mass News reporter Matt Price is live for us in studio now with more on what he had to say. Matt.
Chris, Minnesotans and even many across the country are still grappling with what happened this past weekend. The shooting deaths of former Minnesota House Speaker and current state representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, as well as the attempted murder of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, leading to a 48-hour manhunt for 57-year-old Vance Bolter. That suspect caught last night in Sibley County, Minnesota, bringing the wider community there a sigh of relief. However, this once again raises the alarm about political violence. Western Mass News speaking with Democrat Representative Richard Neal in Forest Park today. He says everyone, regardless of their beliefs, needs to tone it down.
I think that the rhetoric has been charged up. I think that social media amplifies conflict for sure. But also, if you could do much of it anonymously, I think that encourages people. And I also think that cable shows, they tend to gin up extremism.
He also says there is a danger of everyone being their own journalist and that a large amount of misinformation that is spread out there contributes to this problem of violence that is continuing across the country. Reporting live in the studio, Matt Price, Western Mass News.